Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where we take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the Magic Item Supplement Through the Veil Treasures of the Feywild, designed by Elise Cretel et al. For Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I have to say et al. Because there are literally dozens of people who worked on this product, and that has officially broken me in terms of trying to do an audible crediting to everyone, but just please be aware this is a very much a collaborative effort. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Now, this is kind of a sequel to the first Through the Feywild, which I thought meant we were going to get more stories, more adventures, because that's what the first one was, which I believe was one of my favorite products I reviewed last year in terms of the just excellent story and adventure content, obviously themed around the Feywild. This is not an adventure at all, as you can tell by my opening. It's all magic items. So at first I was disappointed because I was like, man, I really liked having all those cool Feywild adventures, not that they were very well designed. So it's disappointing that I'm not getting more of that. Then I started looking through this book and realized, oh crap, this is one of the best magic item supplements I have ever seen, and I have seen a lot of them by now. It is so incredibly well done from a design standpoint, from just the sheer quantity. There are over 400 unique magic items here across weapons, armor, wondrous items, consumables, adventuring gear, trinkets, like everything you can imagine. And they're all themed for the Feywild. And it's incredible how much mileage we get out of that one theme of just, it really accurately reflects how varied and interesting the Feywild can be. I think a lot of people get the wrong ideas of what the Feywild is if they've only ever consumed, Disney stories, or maybe they've, Lewis Carroll doing Alice in Wonderland, but, or just, fairy tales in general. Like, there's just so, like, all of those things are Feywild, right? It's just everything, and they can be as twisted and dark or as whimsical and weird as you want it to be. It's just so interesting and such a cool space to play in an RPG. And these magic items do such a good job of reflecting all of that variety, from a story standpoint, drawing a lot of, Shakespeare and all these things, and fairy tales and the classic stuff that you would know and maybe probably not know, as well as just giving cool mechanical benefits that I thought, oh, that was just a cool, like, item to, bestow upon a player and see them wield that thing. So absolutely incredible. We're going to go over some of them. I highlighted some, ones that I want to talk about. Obviously, I can't cover because it's literally over 170 pages with hundreds of items. There's no way to do an in-depth review of this product and have it be, take an appropriate amount of time. But I am going to highlight some of the things I thought were really, really interesting. But I just want to say at the start, huge thumbs up for this product. Like, I literally made it through, I think, 10 or 15 pages before I opened my Google Doc that was, hey, here are my nominees for the best products I've reviewed this year, and added this one in there. And I still had like 100, over 150, 40, whatever pages to go. Absolutely incredible. So what I love too is it's a great looking product. The sidebars aren't the most attractive thing. If I could have one nitpicky complaint, it just looks like it was, italicized and highlighted. I don't know if I'm wanting a different font type or what, but they're just kind of don't look as good as everything else does. I really like all the artwork that's used. In fact, we're just going to flip through the pages real quick. You can see we get lots of artwork of magic items as well as different scenes. Later on, you'll see like full page art. There we go. Of actual scenes of people like maybe using these magic items, or just scenes from the Feywild. It's very evocative. It does all the right things, which is make this a joy to read. And I love the little leaf like fall motif going on with the actual pages. The kind of off-white background. All of that works really well. My only really nitpicky complaint is probably the sidebars just aren't very attractive looking. But what they are is little backstories for nearly every single item. You can see as I flip through here, almost all of these items have these sidebars which offer these elaborate backstories about where this item comes from, because a big part of the Feywild is the story. Everything's got a story, right? It's all based on all these, fairy tales and storytelling and famous characters, and the whole fairy court is built upon all these stories that they have to tell and everything. And it's so cool to be able to read how all these different magic items are reflected in that, because a lot of times these items are big parts of those stories. So I thought that was really, really cool. So for example, Audacity, one of the very first items on here, is a legendary sentient rapier wielded by a half-elf called Saros Silvercrow. This duplicitous half-elf began his pursuit for power as a warlock, choosing Queen Titania herself as a patron deity and serving her for decades. And he was gifted this rapier, eventually turns on her, is kind of a rakish, daring individual, and ends up freeing a bunch of creatures and monsters from the dungeons beneath the Queen's palace using this rapier. And of course, that's reflected in the fact that the rapier can functions as a chime of opening with an unlimited number of charges, so basically can just open any lock. It also gives cool abilities that reflect the fact that it's, a swashbuckling personality imbued in this rapier. In that you can use your reaction whenever you're attacked to gain advantage on your next attack, which is an audacious retort, or you can gain a headlong charge to charge into people, being all brave and foolhardy. Very, very cool. And then it adds, this personality because it's a sentient item. And it's cool, right? It just adds this whole backstory to this item. It's reflected in these neat mechanics that it allows. Obviously, it's a legendary sentient item, so you can play around with that to pretty great effect. And others, maybe aren't quite as advanced or interesting as that. But that's, not every item has to be this big legendary huge thing either. You can have other stuff that's just Blood Drinker the staff, which is a story of a Fey trickster who loved necrotic stuff. And so this staff deals extra necrotic damage, but then you yourself have a vulnerability to necrotic damage as long as you're holding the staff, because you love necrotic damage. Dispatcher is a crossbow wielded by the drow of the Feywild, or the Fey Dark, which can actually drain spell slots whenever it shoots at a spellcaster and deal additional psychic damage. That's a cool mechanic. I don't think I've ever seen that before in a magic item, and a really neat idea that you could apply to, multiple. And one thing I love about creative magic items is it gets my creative juices flowing, right? Even if I don't want to use that exact, I was like, oh, I don't have anybody that, no player's using a crossbow right now, but you can apply that idea to any other item or weapon. Just the concept of, okay, what if you hit a spellcaster, it could drain if they are a spellcaster, drains their spell slots, or even if they're a innate spellcaster, and then deals damage based on that. That's a cool concept for a weapon that I can run away with and use. The Dryad Walking Stick gives you, I forget the name of the spell, I think it's Tree Stride, that allows you to, teleport essentially from tree to tree. But in this case, it was carved from a tree, which, by the way, there's a table for determining what extra advantage on skill checks you get based on what kind of a tree it was carved from. And then you've got a very pissed off Dryad that's going to hunt you down, because the Dryad is very aware that somebody carved a magic staff or stick, I guess, from their tree. So that's an extra, RP campaign thing for the DM to be able to handle, as you possibly have a Dryad that's trying to hunt you down. And maybe you can, it might not just be a combat encounter, but it could be a bargaining thing, like you have to pay for that. The Aladdrian Recurve Bow is based on, the Aladdrian elves, which can change seasons as part of their racial abilities. And in this case, it's a bow that also can change seasons, not even just four seasons, but different, the solstice, midwinter, spring, equinox, middle of summer, those are all different seasons. But to change them, you have to witness certain events, which is mind-blowingly cool and gives the DM all these different options. So, for example, a new creature regards you as a friend, a flower is given as a gift, a sunset is observed with someone you know. Literally, you're keeping track of life events in an RPG, and they confer mechanical benefits, because now you can essentially unlock the new abilities of this bow. You have to swap between them. I believe there's mechanics for that. And then once you unlock all of them, in other words, you've seen all these events happen, the bow actually upgrades overall from a +1 to a +2. So you basically have this extra little quest line you can go on for this freaking bow while you're witnessing all these different events. That's so cool. I can't even believe how interesting that is. From a weapon, again, you can apply. You don't have to apply this to a bow. You could use any weapon, but that is such an unbelievably cool idea, and still reflects the theme of the Aladdrians, which are the elves that can change those seasons. I freaking love it. So I am 8 pages into this, by the way, and I've already gushed about several items. So you can see why I was absolutely just falling head over heels for this product. The Ironbark Lily is a dagger that was carved from an ironbark tree, and at night the flower petals cover this dagger, so it actually does bludgeoning damage, and during the dawn it does the flower thing and opens its petals up, revealing the dagger inside, which now does piercing damage. And when it does that, when it first opens up every day, the dagger is coated in the nectar of the flower and now deals additional poison damage, but just on that first hit, which should excite rogues. It's all about that, one burst damage thing. And then, of course, it doesn't do any of that anymore, and then you have to wait till night when it closes up, and then day when it opens back. It's, again, such a cool visual thing. It's a neat idea. This one doesn't really have a story about it, but it's just a cool fucking dagger with neat mechanics, which I absolutely love. We're going to go to Shadow's Kiss, which is another dagger. This one was crafted by the Shatterkai Elves. It's a +2 dagger, deals extra cold damage. However, when you attack somebody, you can choose, if they are casting a shadow, you can choose to attack the shadow instead of the person. It has the same armor class. You don't deal damage, but you can pin their shadow, which I think is based on some of these are based on like fairy tales and stories and events and things, and I'm not super well versed in this, but I think a lot of these are inspired by that. You can actually stab their shadow and pin it in place, and thus they have the restrained condition. They can try to break free on their turn by making a DC 15 athletics acrobatics check, but if they're killed while you've got their shadow pinned, then they become a shadow under your command until the next day. Holy crap, that's so cool. I would always be trying to like pin people's shadow. It's just a neat idea. And obviously you've pinned them, so I don't think you can use the dagger anymore. So it becomes this whole interesting like choice thing that the player now gets. It's like unlocking a whole new ability that they have just based on this freaking dagger. Like, it's such a cool idea. That's just weapons, by the way. There are how many? Goodness, let's see. Going to collections is the next. So all of these are weapons. Okay, the first 30 pages are just weapons, and those are so incredible. I'm just gushing about so much fun they are. We get a couple pages of armor, and then we begin the middle section of the supplement, which are collections. And this is an interesting way to organize essentially a bunch of wondrous items, although wondrous items also kind of have their own section as well. These are, sometimes they are set collections where literally if you've played an action RPG like a Diablo or a Torchlight or Grim Dawn or something, where you get certain, parts of a set of they all belong to a certain collection, and you get a set bonus, right? If you have 2 or 3 or 4 items, and that confers a set bonus here, which is not something D&D 5e is usually amenable to because of the attunement restriction, right? So any player, with the exception of maybe some classes, can only attune to 3 items. So it gets really hard to be able to do that. Now, not every item has to require attunement, which is important. So that's not what necessarily all of these are. Some of them are. Some of them do carry those attunements. And an example of that, which I'm going to skip ahead to, is the Raiment of the Long Night, which is apparently a gear that was worn and used by the Prince of Frost. And in this one, they actually offer like 5 different items, which all have cool like ice themes. A winter bow just deals extra cold damage, and you don't have disadvantage when there's like wind. I really like the Cloak of the Howling Winds, where if anybody attacks you in melee, you can use your reaction to essentially blow them away with this kind of Thunderwave-esque maneuver, which is neat. Frostguard armor lets you touch water and gain like an icy barrier, which is like immunity to certain kinds of damage and all that. Very, very cool items. If you have 3 specific items, I believe they're the boots, the armor, and the bow. No, it's the boots, the cloak, and the armor. Then the set items actually activate, and you gain a Ray of Frost cantrip and the Sleet Storm spell once per day. So that's an example of how they're kind of playing around with the set collection thing to a pretty effective level. But some of these are just tied by the fact that they all have something to do with a theme. So for example, this one, Oddities of the Fairy Folk, is a bunch of like food items. It's very Alice in Wonderland-ish, where it's a tea set, or it's tea cakes, or pixie dust, or things that just little consumable items almost that you would associate with little fey folk and fairies and sprites and things. And they'll have little abilities of it might heal you, but it might have an adverse effect if you consume too many of them. I like that the pixie dust can make you fly or turn you invisible. It's a lot of, Tinkerbell, Neverland story, all that. Those are cool ideas. It's an interesting way of organizing it, but it would have been nice to see a few more of those set item things, just because I am a big fan of action RPGs, and I thought that would be interesting. So I did like that there was some of them in there, but that's not all necessarily what you're going to get here. Instead, it's just kind of, we've already got the Feywild theme, and then within that theme, we are going to further organize these items by specific areas within the Feywild. So it might be tied to certain races or cultures or styles or types or stories or gods and goddesses. Any of those kind of things is what you're going to find for collections, which is a really cool way of organizing it, and it's a real joy to look through and read. I don't think I'm going to really break this down too much, and some of our are just weapon styles too, like Sylvan Fletchings is just different kinds of arrows. Symphony of Seasons is a bunch of instruments. It's just different types of items. And then you've got Wondrous Items, which take up literally about 100 pages. As you can imagine, the Feywild is going to be full of just magic items, and it's a lot of stuff that you would expect and a lot of stuff that you would not expect in good ways on both of those. You've got like the classic, poisoned apple, the Apple of Dark Slumber, which has a apparently 75% chance to just knock your ass unconscious until, of course, True Love's Kiss, which everybody is, pretty like, well, what does that mean exactly? Which I thought, recent stuff like Disney's Frozen and Maleficent played around with that pretty well, and like what is true is not necessarily romantic love, for example. It could just be familial love. So it plays around with that with the item as well, which is really smart and fun. And it's just a whole lot of really cool, interesting items. I love the Amulet of the Wild Geese, which is a play on a wild goose chase, which makes it so you're immune to scrying, and you can even implant like false scrying messages. There's a fancy goblet that can detect poisons. There's lanterns and compasses that can reveal where the entrances or exits to the Feywild are, which could be an important plot structure for any campaign that takes place in the Feywild. There's a magical chess set that can give you an insight on your next insight check. There's a feather that can transform into a tiny dragon. One that I wanted to highlight is this one, the Gaze of Magtore, which is tied to the Fomorian story, which is this classic like fallen race myth about this race of, I think they're giants that were once just beautiful and rulers of the Feywild, and then they were cast down, they were stripped of their beauty, magic power, and now they are kind of the wretched creatures of the Feywild who just hate the Fey and everything about it. And this orb, when you attune to it, grafts onto your head as a third eye, which is creepy cool, and that gives you all kinds of these new abilities. You can gain dark vision and true sight. You can cast all these different kind of, spells that would have to do that. Arcane Eye, Eye Bite, Mind Spike, and you also just do damage, almost like a beholder. And then you have this curse where you feel like the will, and because it's empowered by like these archmages of the Fomorians who are kind of trapped. So it actually is like a sentient, chaotic, evil, item that just wants nothing more than just destroy the Feywild and restore the Fomorian Empire. And that can like take over your entire character personality. And there's a really big extra sidebar here that even mentions the fact that, hey, this potentially has huge like campaign spanning effects. So, you use this item with caution, but also you can use it knowing that you can turn this into an entire character's plot arc, or even your entire campaign's plot arc in the Feywild if you want to use the Fomorians in cool ways, just based on this one magic item, which is cool, and I love it to death. It's so awesome. So yeah, 100 pages. I'm not going to go over everything. I just kind of went through a montage of stuff, but it's all very, very cool stuff that I love the hell out of. Creative ideas, stuff that you would recognize, stuff that you might not recognize. We also get a bunch of consumables, potions essentially, trinkets. You can, replace like that D100 or whatever table it comes down to with is it the player's handbook that has the trinkets? And then there's usually a lot of the 5e campaign books will include their own, customized trinkets. Well, this one does that as well, that obviously all reflect and have to do with the Feywild, which is, I think, really fun and really helps bring a character together on character creation, or just add as like, junk loot, quote unquote, which is magic items that aren't really do anything, but still might tell a story or is much more interesting than like, hey, you find, 6 gold or something. Also get adventuring gear, as well as tables and indexes for, thankfully, very superior organization for all of these weapons and items. Because again, this is a 170 plus page book with hundreds of items. So it's a huge thumbs up that we get all these additional ways of being able to find all of these actual items, organized by weapons, armor, and rarity. These rollable tables, by the way, you should recognize if you use the tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I would always recommend. Probably the most used section of the Dungeon Master's Guide for me is the magic item stuff, because I'm A, looking at magic items in there, and B, these tables really do help get a feel for what rarity and how often should players be getting these things, and how often should I put them in my loot caches and all these things. And this one literally uses basically the same tables from the Dungeon Master's Guide in terms of the rarity and how often you should be using them, and just replaces them, because there's that many items, with all of the stuff from the Feywild. So if you have, specifically a Feywild only campaign, there are plenty of items here that you can have purely new content based on stuff from this book, which is absolutely amazing. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Treasures of the Feywild. Stop on a cool page. There we go. It's a cool page. Pro: hundreds of creative, interesting, well-designed magical weapons, armor, items, trinkets, consumables, and adventuring gear. We have both the quality and the quantity in this magic item supplement, which is hugely impressive. Pro: excellent use of the Fey theme, with every item reflecting the Feywild's stories, characters, cultures, and concept. I do think it's a really strong theme in general. It's a whole setting, and it's very, I mentioned in the beginning, it's very evocative and can tell a lot of great stories. I mean, a lot of our modern stories are based on all these fairy tale stories, so it still resonates with us so much. And to use that as a theme, I think, is a smart choice, and it's still very impressive that we're able to create hundreds of items that I feel like all do a pretty good job. They don't all have these massive big, stories, but every item also isn't this massively important legendary item. Some of them might just be, a simple Ironbark Lily dagger, but it still has that cool, the petals close and they open, it still feels like that cool, magical, otherworldly Fey thing without necessarily having this very flowery story tied to it. Pro: nearly every item features an intriguing backstory. I kind of just immediately set into that, but as I mentioned, not all of them do, but enough of them do, where it really does a great job of evoking all of that great Feywild content. Pro: a large variety of lovely artwork of magic items, Fey creatures, and immersive scenes. Basically, I love the production levels and layouts. Just absolutely nice looking product. And Pro: 10 rollable magic item titles organized by rarity. There may actually be more than 10. I don't know why I said 10 on there, but there was, in other words, it replaces the ones from the Dungeon Masters Guild and uses all the stuff from the Feywild. And that's a great way of organizing the content, because those are the tables that are the most useful for me as the DM, instead of going through and saying, okay, let me read this 180-page supplement and try to pick out the few items that I like. That's a challenge for anybody. Versus looking at the table going, okay, I've got a tier 1 party, here's the kind of stuff that they should be looking at first. It helps you break that up and be able to see, or you can say, okay, what are some end game legendary stuff? Maybe I want to give my party access to that and make that a focal point for the campaign. Cons: I got nothing. It's just a freaking fantastic product from start to finish. Maybe I can nitpick the literal look of the sidebar, but that's extremely nitpicky and not an actual official con here. I honestly, it's just absolutely stellar. Final verdict: with literally hundreds of well-designed magic items brimming with a fully realized Feywild theme, Treasures of the Feywild is the rare magic item supplement that possesses both the quality and quantity that rivals, if not surpasses, the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. You can support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Christopher, Thomas, Adam, Stan, Alex, Cam, William, I'm Loud, and Lachlan Baird. And gold patrons RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Lumpy Spuds, Drome, Sclenia, Nick, Blood, Angel, Veronis, Babu, Nathan, Faz Like a Tortoise, James, and Kyle. Thank you all very much for your support.